Members and guests and friends, welcome to this special event, DEI and Structural Racism, a conversation between diversity strategists. I am Lydia Mallett, an 8-year member of Impact 100 and a member of the DEI committee. I am thrilled to welcome back to Impact 100 Dr. Kevin Ahmad Jenkins, lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania, to participate in this fireside chat with Impact 100 Founders Fellow, Nnenna Akotaobi, about implicit bias and strategies for embedding equity in everyday practice. For those of you new to Impact 100, here's a quick history of our DEI journey. Issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion have been a priority of Impact 100 since early 2012, when a working group was formed to explore Impact's commitment to being better grant makers through DEI initiatives. In 2014, we welcomed our first class of Founders Fellow, an important step in encouraging young and diverse women to join Impact 100 Philadelphia. This past year, a standing DEI committee with board representation was established. In 2020, the global pandemic and the social justice movement served to strengthen our commitment to the practice of fairness to our members and to our grantees and the communities we serve. The goal of tonight's discussion between these two diversity professionals is to encourage and model the practice of naming biased and racist behavior and offer solutions to facilitate personal and organizational change. On this call, you'll be muted until the end of our program. Your video can be off or on, although we'd love to see you. This program is also being recorded to share with those who can't be here. The event will be conducted webinar style so that Nnenna and Kevin are able to speak fluidly with each other tonight. The chat is closed, but if you would like to submit a question for the speakers this evening, you can do so using the form link shared by our moderator. To follow up with one of the speakers directly, please contact them through their websites. Their websites are in the chat. And now for a bit about our speakers. Dr. Kevin Ahmad Jenkins was introduced to Impact 100 by Joanne Levy, chair of the Founders Fellows Committee. After working with him at the Leonard David Institute of Health Economics at the University of Pennsylvania, where he talked with her students about the influence of race, racism, and psychosocial stress within medicine, she suggested that he provide similar information to Impact members at the annual kickoff. Prior to embarking on an academic career, Dr. Jenkins was an award-winning journalist. Currently, his consulting practice includes work with Fortune 500 and other companies on the effects of structural racism on corporate culture and how to confront and ameliorate these effects. Tonight's program is a return engagement for which we are very grateful. Nnenna Akotaobi is a first-year Impact 100 Philadelphia Founders Fellow. She currently leads diversity, talent, and HR at Springboard Collaborative. Nnenna previously served as the executive director of the Black Women in Sport Foundation, where her work included increasing leadership roles for women in professional and college sports. She is the founder and principal consultant at 122 Consulting Group, a boutique firm specializing in creating comprehensive diversity and inclusion solutions for nonprofits, businesses, and institutions of higher education. It is now my pleasure to turn the program over to Kevin and Nnenna.
Thank you, Lydia. Kevin, how are you doing?
Kevin's muted.
You might have to unmute yourself, Kevin.
Not letting me.
There you go.
All right, now here we go. I was like, I got to give myself another prize. We play bingo whenever you're muted or talk over people. I'm well.
Bingo.
How are you?
I'm here. It's another day in the pandemic, but I am I am so excited to be in conversation with you, with a few hundred of our colleagues and friends. But you and I have had these conversations before, and I'm excited to talk with you about the ways we see structural racism impacting our work as practitioners, and you as a researcher and a practitioner, and for folks to be witness to our conversation. More importantly, I think I'm really excited to talk about the pathway into seeing this discussion with clarity and understanding blind spots and how our deeply held convictions impact our work, your and my work. It's funny because we even had an interesting journey into this conversation tonight.
Yeah.
And so my first question for you is, what are the ways that organizations' understanding of worth and value impact our work as DEI practitioners? And what are some of the critical lessons learned for organizations when thinking about engaging in this work with folks like us?
Well, again, I want to thank everyone for all those who had to participate and put something together to get me here. I'm so grateful and thankful to be with you tonight. You know, for me, I think coming into this space, I remember trying to talk about racism and its effect on health and quantifying it, because the issue was our stories aren't believed. The issue becomes that, you know, when we think about, if you want to do criminal justice, you can think about the line of criminality moves based on who legislates law.
Right.
When we think about education, the line of intellect moves based on who's teaching. When we think about in the corporate space, the line of what is deemed professional as well as one that is deemed success is a line that's always created by folks who are not, if you will, in the majority of the culture where you work. And what I found is that if I could just figure out a way to show how these interactions of racism, sexism, Islamophobia, not just race, but just the rubs of social interaction creates, quite honestly and truly, sympathetic overactivity, right? So as soon as I started talking that, people stopped. They were like, hold up, this guy knows what he's talking about. So it took me getting there because I wanted to always begin with the stories of what's going on, but people weren't believing that.
Right.
You know, so that's often what's been hard to do, is to navigate these spaces where we can make people understand why we need to have these conversations. So there's no value placed on it, right? There's no value placed on these conversations oftentimes. Therefore, when it comes to the worth idea, value is what the benefit is in that kind of more of a social context. Worth is that economic piece, what you're willing to pay. And it took the pandemic for me to see, after I was getting call after call, email after email saying, can you do this? Can you do this? You know, ABC World News, what do you think about this? And I'm like, whoa, I don't want to do this. I don't want to talk, you know, because I'm scared, because guess what? The moment you open your mouth, now you're open for everybody who wants to disagree and do all of those things. So this journey began because I used to get my worth and value mixed up. I used to think because nobody was willing to pay for my services, I had no value, right? And now that I'm in this space, I know what value I bring. I know what I'm going to be able to do. I literally, last week I had a talk every day last week. I got 3 this week, you know, but I understand what I do now. And I understand the worth behind it. I understand the value behind it. And I'm in control when I give it away.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for us all to know.
I mean, that sounds like a very interesting lesson learned in terms of, one, our own value in this work, but two, for other organizations to say that this work isn't just about the sentiments of the marginalized, like how we articulated the business case for diversity, right? That's not what this is, right? There are broader implications of this work, and you've said it. You have to see the value on it, and you have to be willing to pay for it. And we have to be able to articulate what those boundaries are, what those guardrails are for us as practitioners to help support elevating the value of this critical work, because this is organizational development work, right?
Yeah, and you know, I laugh because I had an executive out of somewhere in PA, reached out to me. She was like, I saw you on 2 events and I just always wanted to talk to you. You're just dynamic, you're amazing, all this kind of stuff. And, you know, I'm not like, hey, this is billable hours. No, I was like, let's talk.
Yeah.
You know, 30 minutes, let's talk. You know, we were running up against that 30 though, because it was a great conversation. But we're at a place now where, you know, I spoke to FedEx last week and their managers and executives, not to, you know, the low chain employees, because the conversations begin with management and executives, and we have to have these conversations. So I know that we did Fox News or Fox Broadcasting Company, not just Fox News, but Fox Broadcasting Company in December, you know, and you have these conversations and you're like, whoa, it's starting to happen. Yeah, this is like necessary. And they not only see the value in it, but they're cutting those checks because they know that you can't do this wrong, because what's at stake is bigger than just simply the curiosity of your audience, of your teams.
Yeah, it's interesting how we arrived here, because it seems like not until you know the risks are you willing to identify the value. Yeah. So the risks now, the social risks, the political risks, the business risks are so significant for organizations like Impact and others, that now we have to place value, but the value can't just be in rhetoric, and the value can't just be in what we say. It has to be in how we operate and how we embed this practice, the systemic, and what we're talking about tonight. But I'm actually more interested in how you found yourself in this work. So what was your entry point into being the person that goes to Fox News, the person that goes to all of these Fortune 500 corporations and says, let's talk?
Yeah, well, so I used to be the lottery host for the state of North Carolina. I was the first weekend lottery host. That was my real official job. I got a big check somewhere. I don't put that in my pretty background. You know, we've all changed our Zoom backgrounds a million times in this pandemic. So this is a real background, by the way, but like, it's not official until my little light is on behind me. So it's official now, let's go. So did the lottery. So just remember this for those who are, if you have any familiarity with North Carolina, you know the lottery didn't start until 07. Like, we were a little late to the party. It was a great benefit for me in my life, but you know, it was one of those moments where I would do the lottery show at WRAL Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. So it ran right before the weather, or right after the weather segment. So I had finished up the lottery. It was the best, easiest money I ever made in my life. Literally 60 seconds, walk in and do your little voice and turn the little lottery balls and say, who's winning tonight? And I'm out, right? So I'm excited. I had an old beat up Cadillac. The driver's side windows did not roll down. When it said full, it was really empty. And when it said empty, it was full. I had a mess of a car, but listen,
I've been there.
We've all been there, right? So car broke down and I need a ride. So I called my homeboy. I'm like, yo, can you come get me? So as I'm waiting outside, just finished doing my lottery show, I'm in a full suit. It was a little cold, not Philly cold, because apparently Philadelphia doesn't understand, like, people like us I'm not built for this kind of weather. So I just have on a little Scully. I'm just standing there waiting on my friend. I got on a nice coat and all that. I shouldn't have to say what I have on because it shouldn't matter. And the weather woman walks out. And I just turned around because I just heard the door open. And as soon as she walks out, she's like, oh my God, what are you doing here? And I'm like, huh? And I'm like, I kind of like laugh because when we get nervous, we laugh. I don't know what it is about us as humans, right? That's one of our things. So I start kind of giggling a little bit. I'm like, I'm the lottery guy. What's your issue? And I've seen her, I've walked by her in the hallway, but the lottery literally runs right after. So she's never seen me on TV.
Right. And
the funny thing is I've never seen her do her thing unless I wasn't working. So it was funny, but the anchor, Ken Smith, black guy, was the anchor. So the next day, that was on Saturday night, Sunday night comes, and Ken is dying laughing because they saw me in the break room. So it's like, this woman has seen me. I've tried speaking to her so many times. I've walked past her so many times. She never acknowledged my presence. But the moment she acknowledges my presence, there's danger. There was fear. Mm. And I remember when I used to do this, Everywhere I would go, there was danger and there was fear. It was this idea that wherever I was, no matter how I was dressed, I didn't belong. So what people noticed in 2007, they couldn't understand it. I quit all my jobs. I was the lottery host. I was the announcer for the AAA affiliate of the Durham Bulls, of Tampa Bay, the Durham Bulls. I was the announcer for North Carolina Central football, basketball, and band. I was somewhat doing motivational speaking. I wasn't kind of, anywhere close to where I'm at now. But guess what? All of that stuff happened. And I was just like, maybe if I get a PhD, people are like, not think I'm scary and gonna kill you, right? Went to the University of Florida. Little did I know, right? I was like, oh, got to UF and Trayvon Martin was killed. And in that moment, I connected with this little boy because I know what it's like wearing a hoodie in the rain. I know what it's like. I grew up in a military town where for Marines, if you don't look right, if they think you're a Marine, they can check you in the street. But because I've always looked old, at 15, I looked like I was in the military. So they just would say things and do things too, but I never attached my race to it. But the hardest lesson I learned was when I got to the University of Florida and I called security to open the door. On a Sunday, we were doing a writing retreat for my research lab. And now as a grad student, I had a research lab with 32 students in it who were interested in racism and health. So just say that, right? So after we do that, the call the security guard, you have to call them to open the door. I'm in a full suit, I had just left church. And the security guard finally comes up after like 25 minutes in Florida heat. And we're from Florida, so Florida's home, so I know heat. I don't know cold, I know heat. So I'm standing there hitting with this, right? And then finally the guy is like, and I thought he was coming to open the door for me. And he says, well, I got a call that there was some suspicious people standing outside. And I was like, you talking about us? I was like, dude, I got a full suit on. These are my students. I'm a lecturer here. Like, what's the deal? The next, that was on Sunday. Then on that Wednesday, I was on C-SPAN with Charles Blow, and that's when this vision started. Because it's as beautiful as everything you read in my bio states, I still have the cops called on me. As beautiful as everything when I won 40 under 40 and I was presented an award by Congresswoman Robin Kelly, I still, the next day when I went to my office at the University of Pennsylvania after being awarded the 40 under 40 for Healthcare Leaders Awards, and I had just won another award for Educationary Visionary Award for something up in New York. I'm on a high and I get on the elevator to hit the 12th floor, and look, lo and behold, as I go to hit that button, the lady that was already on the elevator jerks her purse and jumps to the back. It's something in this. So I wanted to start a business that allowed me to have a conversation with people, right, to ask, what is the thing that's short-circuiting us in these moments where there's no danger, right? And that's been my thing. Like, I've been trying to deal with stigma and the effect of stigma, not just on health and healthcare, but now we've moved out of this space in medicine to have these conversations at a larger level with companies and foundations, grant makers. That's why I was so excited about this. This is important because how much of our stigma makes us jump back like the weather lady did when we see somebody's grant from a certain organization? How much of our stigma means we don't hire this group, but we'll hire this group? Right. So that's what brought me here. It brought me here from a non-traditional background because they only saw me as an athlete and an entertainer.
I find that so compelling because the way I found myself into this work is different, but the themes are similar, right? This theme of stigma and how do we unpack that? And how do we uncouple like these deeply held convictions that we have and be able to see the world differently? Because I found myself in this work through having these like rich, multicultural, multi-generational, interreligious experiences growing up, and then going to college and realizing that's not everybody's experience. And it certainly wasn't my experience in college, right? And so very similarly, I quickly learned that the world is not reflected in the way I grew up. And how do we enhance people's felt experiences so that they're enriched in such ways that we can eliminate those stigmas that you talk about? So I find that so compelling and so astute, because I don't think that we do enough self-reflection on the ways in which we show up and how those seemingly small things, those small value systems perpetuate these big systemic things, the things that we're talking about tonight, right?
But it's also about how we have the conversation.
Right.
Right. And I want to know, just even from your perspective, like, how do we have these conversations? Because most people just think the expertise we bring is that we're Black. You know, like I got degrees, I've done stuff, I've been places, but I've seen people clam up. This is before like you could go online and see my photo.
Right.
So when they would see me walk in the room, you'd be like, uh-oh. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? Because most people think I'm going to share what I shared with you just before this. Like, I never talk about those stories in any of my work. When it comes to my workshops, my trainings, even my teaching, you don't hear about that. That's my personal business, right? That's my personal journey. And like you said, that's not everybody. So how do you have the conversations that need to be had? You know, I think we use the word delicately too much, because there's nothing delicate that happened for Tamir Rice, right? There was nothing delicate that happened for, you know, Freddie Gray, or a lot of these young kids, boys, girls, men, women that have been Black and did nothing wrong. They were killed for no reason, right? But there's nothing delicate about those conversations, because we've had to have those conversations all our lives.
Right.
But now I'm being asked to have the delicate conversation. So how do you have them in corporate spaces when what we know is the literature tells us 40% of Black people don't want to have these conversations, because we know that if we share too much, we probably won't be there long because we'll be deemed scary. And if we don't share enough, we know nothing's going to happen, because there's no true framework around truly moving equity forward.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's no delicate. And I know your approach is thoughtful, but it's likely not delicate. And similarly, our approach is thoughtful and it's effective, but it's not delicate. And I think part of the challenge that we found is we're socialized to have these conversations delicately. People are not equipped. We do not have the competencies as a society to have explicit conversations about race, racism, even about politics. I mean, how many examples can you think of in your mind growing up where people told you don't talk about politics in the workplace, don't talk about race, right? We've been socialized, we've been oriented, and we can trace the through line of how we were socialized, how we arrived here, coming out of the civil rights movement, that like grand course correction socially to say, we're talking about race, we don't want to talk about race anymore. So we have a generation of people who are illiterate talking about race, racism, difficult things. And how that shows up in corporations and organizations is that we don't have the practice. We haven't flexed our muscles. And those things that are made difficult, we tend to either tuck away until they boil over, right? Until they boil over. I'm recalling a time specifically that highlights this example, thinking about 8 months ago, 9 months ago, 10 months ago, before the pandemic. How long have we been doing this? Anyway,
over a year now.
I can't even, I don't want to think about it. But so, but when we could use to move through the world, I was doing a workshop, and one of the questions I often asked was, when was the last time you talked about race? And I remember this so distinctly. There was a woman, older woman, white woman, who raised her hand, and she gave a wonderful example about like the last time she talked explicitly about race. And she talked about a scenario, this was on a college campus. She talked about a scenario 2 years prior where there were some students that had issues that centered on race. And she kind of was the center point in facilitating the dialogue, and it was a good learning moment for her. So she reflected on that moment for her. And then I had a student, a young woman of color, who raised her hand right after that woman. And I said, when was the last time you talked about race? She said, 2 minutes ago on Twitter. 2 years and 2 minutes.
Right.
That's the literacy gap. So these same folks are showing up in the workplace. Of course, we're not equipped, right? So there cannot be any delicate. There cannot be any delicate approach. Oftentimes, I know this happens to you, where we get calls and people say, hey, we're trying to do equity work and we want to you know, this aligns with our values, aligns with our mission, and we just want to do great work and continue the work that we're already doing. My first question is always, what happened? Mm-hmm. And folks always respond, no, you know, nothing. I think, you know, things are good. Pulse check is good. And I say, thank you for sharing that. Tell me a little bit more about what's going on in your environment. Because there's always a catalyst. There is always a catalyst, right? So we cannot be gentle when there's a catalyst. And so it's teaching people to unlearn these modalities around gently approaching these issues and encouraging people to practice. If you can't talk about these things every day, of course you're not going to feel comfortable. Yeah. Of course you're not going to feel comfortable. And I imagine that shows up for your work as well.
There was a story just recently up in Rochester, New York, where the police had handcuffed and maced a like 8-year-old Black girl. And a bunch of people were sending me this article, not realizing, so that award I was talking about I got in New York, like they brought me to that area specifically between Utica, Rochester. We love driving it with my wife and I because they had this great seafood restaurant. Oh my God. But anyway, but I was called in because at a local community college up there, one of the kids put a noose on his roommate's pillow. I was called into another institution up there because they were having not 1, not 2, not 4, not 5. It was literally like 20 different racism issues. And what I often say is that when we're thinking we're talking about race, we're really talking about racism. Mm-hmm. And if we can make that delineation, because listen, saying kiss me, I'm Irish doesn't bother anybody. But saying kill me, I'm Irish, that's the difference, right? Or kill him because he's Irish, that's racism, right? Race is kiss me, I'm Irish. So why is it that kiss me, I'm Irish is cool, but if you see the continent of Africa, you get nervous. Like, hold up now, what's going on? Why are we changing stuff? Because these are parts of the issues of not being able to have these conversations. Yeah. Trying to launch initiatives before, you know, and even that young lady reached out, that's just, she's gonna have an amazing career. Her new position is gonna be amazing. But I was helping her name the title of her role. They don't even have a title for this job yet, right? And she was just like, I don't know what to do. You know, I've worked here for how many other years, and now I'm in this situation. I'm in the seat. And I was like, well, how have you been in your previous seat? And she got a little antsy, a little uncomfortable. Now, what I'm gonna say is gonna mess with some people, so just stick with me. And this is an African-American woman. But I asked her, I said, in order to exact equity, what did you have to do? And she was like, I had to shake some stuff up. So now the people who I was like always lighting fires under their feet, they're my colleagues now because I'm a VP now. And I said, now what are you going to do to show them that that was only one dimension of you? And she paused. She was like, I don't know. Like, what do I need to do? And I was like, listen, do a listening tour. Do a listening tour. And I said, why are you doing a listening tour? Because the first thing that everybody wants to do when they start these businesses or start trying to do DE&I stuff is start talking. Just start telling people what to do, because that's what we all think. You know what I mean? Like, we all want to just impart whatever quick expertise we have, and we've never heard from the people we're trying to serve. So the words during the 60s, the words were equality. What's happened to the words in 2021 is equity. Because what we learned is that even with equality, when we leave everybody alone allegedly and treat everybody the same, we still have a gap. And what equity is saying is we're filling the gaps as an organization. And what I'm trying to push people to do in these spaces is try to learn more before you do.
Right.
You know, and unfortunately, sometimes it's your fault. Sometimes you mess up. Sometimes there's a fire. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's gonna be a fire. You know, so when we get those calls, you're coming in, most people lie to you and don't tell you what's really going on until you get there. And it takes that person that's sitting in the back of the room that's never said a word to pull you to the side when you run into the restroom real quick and they give you the real of what's going on.
Right.
You know, and that's where this work really is impactful. Yeah.
It's triangulating around all those tension points that we've talked about, right? So we have folks who have deeply held beliefs and biases, right? We have folks who are generally like illiterate, ill-equipped to talk about these things explicitly, not practiced, right? And then you have organizations who are the makeup of folks who have these competency gaps. And then you have the tension of folks who have these felt experiences, people on the margins, particularly when we're talking about race, like folks with these marginalized identities saying, hey, I need to ring the alarm. And then the confluence of all of those things are the phone calls we get, right? And so in that environment, I'm thinking about how do we help people understand how to launch these DEI initiatives, but more importantly, what are the risks, what are the pitfalls, given all of those tension points that we talked about?
Well, I'll say this. I have a simple approach that really just comes from a lot of error, and a lot of people don't, again, they look at us sometimes where our expertise is because we're Black. No. And this is what offends me, and I'm not downing any other speakers who do this in DE&I spaces, but I'm going to be honest, I know a lot of white speakers who do this work. And what they're doing is citing the work of me and my colleagues. They just happen to say it differently. They're using all our talking points, all our research, all our lived experiences, but because as long as we don't say it, it's not going to be offensive. And what I said is, I was the Durham Bulls host. I had never seen a baseball game a day in my life and got hired as their on-field announcer. On the first day of my job, I'm nervous, I'm pacing around the stadium. So people at that time, you got to understand, nobody knew who I was yet. So there was this guy, he was the minister of health, ironically, from Venezuela. He was like this, big deal and all that. So they had brought him in, and USA Baseball had just kind of come in as well, but they were trying to get to the ballpark, but that's a long story. So anyway, this guy starts talking to me. My mother taught Spanish and English for 42 years. She's a retired Spanish and English teacher. So, I got some broken Spanish, and I mean real, real broken, like the bag of chips that's in the back of your grocery store broken Spanish. So we're trying to communicate with each other. And then finally we had that moment where we said some things, talked about some stuff. And then another guy walks up and he was like, it's my first time in the South, because he could tell I couldn't speak Spanish. And the other guy, he was like, I don't know how we're going to do this. But what I asked him is, have you had sweet tea yet? Have you had barbecue yet, man? You can't be in the South and not have sweet tea and barbecue. And then I said, he was like, nah, I've never had sweet tea before. And I'm like, really? Come with me. So now I got this guy that doesn't speak English that great, who's really important. You got this other dude, he was probably important too, because he was up in the skybox level. But we're all walking, I'm taking them to go get some sweet tea and barbecue. And then I disclosed my vulnerability. I said, I've never seen a baseball game before. And the guy was from New York. He said, I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know in the next 2 minutes, right? And I think that's how we try to do DE&I, right? Where we know we have so many blind spots, vulnerabilities, opportunities, whatever the positive spin is, right? But we want to whisper to people like, I don't know anything about this and tell me something, but tell me really quick because I don't want anybody to know I don't know. Mm-hmm. And that it can't work that way, because we need an investment of time. You need an investment of reflection. And then we have to do it again, because if you like breakfast like I do, making pancakes, right? We all make pancakes, and that first pancake is probably gonna be terrible because it might not be hot enough, or maybe it's too hot. And then you probably throw away the second one because it's probably the opposite of whatever the first one was. But it doesn't mean we're not having breakfast. It just means you got to take your time. With these conversations, we like to stop at the first pancake and say, this didn't work. We have to be committed in time. And that's what I've been doing. I've been saying, listen, I will not sign a contract with an organization unless, you don't have to bring me back, but you got to show me that you have a strategy beyond me coming in. Mm-hmm. Because those people that grab both of us as we're trying to catch the restroom break or just trying to get a quick moment to check your phone, and somebody's just like, I just need to tell you everything that's been happening to me.
Yes.
Those people, they need us.
Yeah.
Because we're speaking for them.
Yeah. I hear that. I hear you saying that the sustained work. And I also hear you saying we got to take this work out of the shadows and into the light.
That's right.
But in order to do that, we also have to divorce ourselves from how we personalize this work, meaning, and this is not you and I mean, how organizations see themselves in this work. I think it's hard for folks to not assign personal values to this work. Meaning, if I criticize this organization's approach to equity, that means you're being critical of me. It means you're being critical of my value systems. It means you're being critical of my family. It means that you're being critical of my faith, right? And until we kind of divorce our deeply held beliefs from like this systemic organizational change that we're trying to make, and it's almost impossible to bring that work into the light. So I like that point of we have to talk explicitly about it to have impact, and we have to do it consistently. Flex the muscle, right?
And loudly.
And loudly.
Because that's the thing. We're so embarrassed by what we don't know. And the truth is, we know this country is more racially segregated in neighborhoods than we were today than we were in the 50s and 60s. Right? What we know is that the income gap is growing. What we know is that the health issues, they're getting worse. They're not getting better. Infant mortality rates for Black women compared to white women, or maternal mortality rates for Black women compared to white women, they're not gotten smaller, they've grown. Infant mortality rates between Black and white babies, they've not gotten smaller, they have grown or sustained throughout, and I'm talking 1890s data that I have. So when we have these conversations, one of the things why I approach this from a stigma perspective is this. If I can kick the leg of stigma under the stool of racism, what happens? So in order for racism to work, and I told y'all this last time you saw me, you gotta have 4 things. You gotta have power, you gotta have perception, you gotta have performance, that's the action, and you gotta have propagation. So power, what it sounds like. I got resources. I'm going to tell you who gets to have the resources, right? Perception. I'm going to give resources out based on who's in what group membership, based on what I see, right? The performance is an action, because if you have power and you just don't like people, that's not racism, that's prejudice. And according to sociologists, you're good, but you're not good, right? But the minute you do something to somebody, that's the performance, that's the action. Right? So in medicine, some of the conversations we've been having is, what does racism look like in 21st century medicine? Is it not doing stuff? Is it doing too much stuff? Right? But let's get to the last piece, propagation. That means when you act on your perception, stigma, and you reroute resources, opportunities, things, chances, based on that perception, and you do something, then there's no consequence. The reason why people have been protesting in the streets over certain things was because there was no consequence to something that shouldn't be that hard to deal with, right? It shouldn't have been hard to say, listen, putting your knee on somebody's neck for that long, it shouldn't have taken that long, right? But then in the same respect, here we are having these other conversations about the statistics of racial health disparities. They haven't changed. But the reason why people are so willing to accept them is because of stigma, because we can say as researchers, well, they don't take care of themselves. Why is there disparities in education? Oh, they're not smart enough. Nobody wants to say we're holding down resources. We're rerouting resources so the kids in North Philly aren't getting the same education. Okay. Sorry, I got excited. We have to have a real conversation about what we're doing with our power and how our perception / stigma are rerouting things.
Yeah.
How we're performing racism, even if you don't know you're doing it, and how we're allowing it to happen by propagation, by just saying,
And that all of those things that aren't necessarily an indictment on your humanity, but it's a call to, how do I undo this? How do I pay attention to what's going on and be thoughtful on how I reimagine how I engage the world, how I engage with people, how I engage with myself and my own value systems, right? That's an invitation to reimagine it. It's not a judgment or an indictment on your humanity. asking these questions and paying attention to these things, right?
So simple. We all talk about equity and equality, and I'll be honest, the issue that we have now is once we've seen the word equality somewhat come to fruition through legislation, then the next issue was you froze in time all the bad stuff that happened to people. So even though we said legislatively, you now have access, we still haven't really had the second conversation of equity by saying, okay, yeah, we've frozen everybody in time now that we're all equal. But what we're still noticing is one person started the race 400 years ago, another one started 2, another one started about 10 minutes ago, which is why one person could talk about race 2 minutes ago compared to 2 years ago. Right? And more than likely, when they talked about race 2 years ago, it was because it was like, oh, I saw this very interesting story.
Yeah.
We're curious, but do we care?
Right. And that doesn't even account for, so we talk about equality, we talk about equity, doesn't account for justice, right? Which is the course correction. Right. So the equality is giving people the same thing. The equity is, oh, maybe we actually need to give people what they need, which might be more, which might be whatever. But we're ignoring the course correction, the injustice, right? So this idea of how do we embed justice into this equation and combine all of those things into a strategy. And I think that's where organizations often miss, right? They're starting to have the conversations about quality, perhaps they're evolving to, oh, equity, right? But they're not talking about what are we doing about these aggrieved Black employees, right? That we ignored for the history of our organization. Now we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, but they're tired, right? It's the very public example of what's going on at Adidas. What happened with Adidas starting this summer, right? Adidas saying we're committing hundreds of millions of dollars to racial equity, but their Black employees said, what about the past 3 years of my life? Right? That justice piece. So if we're missing that piece, we don't have a strategy. If an organization is missing that piece, justice, it doesn't have a strategy, right? It's a strategy that's falling short.
And it unfortunately, it's going to take, even in my classes where we talk about, gender inequality. Can we just be honest? We've been talking about this for a long time too. This is something we all can understand, right? Gender inequality. We've been talking about women getting paid less than men forever. You look at court cases when a man dies versus a woman dies, and the punitive damages are different. The research suggests that effectively anywhere where we can commodify based on the concept of sex, women are valued less than men. And then we get these corporations that send out a press release that say, oh, we're ready to fix the gender gap and the wealth gaps for this, that, and the other. And we're proposing a new program to help out, all the new people we hire. But then you're looking behind you because your door is getting beat on because it's a bunch of women that are like, hey, I've been here for 20 years. It's the same thing. How do you exact equity? Because it sounds good. But in order to do it in real time, you got to make a hard left. You can't just sit here and say, we're going to figure it out, or we're going to do this step, that step. That's why we have to have conversations, because so many people have to get involved. You got to turn a lot of people around. And if they can't turn around, they can get gone. And that's what I tell our managers and our executives. I'm like, listen, I understand. You may be the problem too, right? You may have established a certain culture, but if you're going to truly take this ship in the right direction, some people may have to go, right? Because the other thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to show up into a situation where people, kind of perform or pantomime equity, right? Where you kind of just do the stuff that you're supposed to do, you say the stuff you're supposed to say. But then I met a chief diversity officer at a major, and I mean major company, who reached out and said, look, I don't know anything about diversity. This person was like, I have a gay son, that's why I took this job. And George Floyd was just murdered, and I got to talk about race, and I don't know what to do. This is when it gets real. This is what we're here for.
So how does a person who like that, in that example, who has all of this power, likely to make systemic decisions or significantly impactful decisions across an organization? How do they leverage what they have when there's a competency gap?
First off, it begins with humility. And I always say, do not define before you engage. Make sure you engage people, you listen to people. You got to just put yourself on it. When you take a new job, if you're in a role of, DE&I spaces where you got to know this stuff, you need to put yourself on lockdown for 60 days and just do a listening tour and talk to as many people within the organization who don't look like you, who don't identify with the things you identify with. And the thing I've always said, and I just said this to a client we had 2 days ago, I said, listen, you can't make all of this a visiting team proposition either, which what I mean by that is, whenever we are ready to do the new strategy, what do? Come to us. I love the University of Pennsylvania, but we don't leave the University of Pennsylvania, and that's the problem, right? Everything's a home court game for us, but the people we're quote unquote trying to help, they're the ones that have to trek to get to us and go through all of this to sit, and you're in my space. To me, the leverage of equity also means I lead the C-suite. And I go to my employees, my teammates, I listen to them in their space, not mine. In some cases, the person that called out, I believe it was York, actually, out in York, I was like, don't meet in your office or their office. Go somewhere else. Like, this stuff matters, right? And that's the thing, you learn this because what we do is data-driven. How do you use data in this work that you do? Because most people just think we just come in and we're like, well, my mama said, no.
It informs everything. I think sometimes when we apply our methodology, folks are surprised at how effective it is, because the negotiation that happens when we start talking about, here's going to be our approach and we need you to commit to it, because we know it's effective, right? And you just named one of those strategies, right? How do we democratize space? How do we empower people and level out that authority, level out that power in such a way that we can access the issues truly? How do we really be thoughtful about how we design space? Our design is intentional, right? I think that's hard for folks to see. And it's even more difficult when you're trying to do the work on your own, right? Because I think for a lot of organizations, for a lot of folks, it's like, this is the right thing to do. It aligns with my values. So we're going to dive right in and we're going to go straight into action, right? We're going to go straight into action. There's a problem. We're going to post a black square. We're going to go straight into action, right? But you're missing all of those other critical elements, which are listening, empowering people, democratizing space, meeting people where they are, thinking about justice, thinking about your impact on people, thinking about the harm that's been perpetuated and caused, right? How those harms have been embedded in your systems, your policies and practices. You don't have all of those things. You don't have a strategy, right? You have the performance that you're talking about.
Just straight up, that's all I see every single time I go somewhere. They're like, let me do this to make him think I'm doing it right. And I'm like, you're not doing this for me, because I'm going to be back home. I'm going to be back home. But what I won't let people do is use my name to say we're performing. Right? I won't allow that anymore. I figured that out a long time ago. It took me a while, but I figured that out. But I want to give you, I know a lot of people are sitting there, well, how do we have a conversation? How do we have a conversation? Let me tell you, first thing, I always begin with what makes you feel affirmed in this space, right? Because what I'm asking is what makes you feel good? Because really, if you're doing it in your corporate environments, you're actually saying, what am I doing right? Stroking your ego first. So you're starting a conversation about what makes you feel affirmed. I really like when you tell me that, good job. You remember that one time we just finished that project and you gave me a shout out to everybody on the team. I really appreciated that. Now we're given a moment, because something like a tense conversation at DE&I is, it can be a little turned up, right? So you start with the positive.
Yeah.
And then you go to the question everybody wants to know. Well, how do I ask? How do I get better? Ready for it? Take a pause. Okay. What we tell people to ask is, when is the last time you had to use your strength at work? So you're tapping into two principles: resilience, because one, we know that there was a problem, there was a fire. But you're also telling me in the same answer, I overcame that problem. And we probably need to systematize your approach so that problem doesn't happen again. Right? Prime example. There was a person with one of our clients that came to me again, one of those moments. I'm on my way. I drink a lot of water. I don't drink as much coffee in them sessions. So you gotta go, you gotta go. So I'm on my way, going to go to the go. And she's just like, excuse me, I gotta talk to you really quick. And I'm like, doing the dance, like I gotta go, but okay. And finally, she just said, like, my last performance review, they said that I don't look like I'm having fun. And I was like, I'm gonna be right back. So I had to go do what I do. I came right back, and because I was thinking about this, because I'm talking to this person's management team. And this is that moment where in all the credit hours that I've achieved in my lifetime, fun was never one of my credit units on any transcript that I've had. So what are you using that as an interpretation, a shorthand interpretation for? You don't fit here. And you're not showing it. And then I asked her, so I said, well, how long have you been working here? Because I'm thinking she's been there for 2-3 years, 2 weeks. And she already got a performance evaluation saying she doesn't look like she's having fun. So we're not just policing. So when we let you in and you finally belong, I then get policed in how I look and how I speak and how I do this. And if my hair is tied back, if I want to do the little twisties in my hair today. So we got to make some decisions about how these things are going to go, because this isn't, we don't need $1 billion budget to change corporations. What do I do that makes you feel affirmed? And keep doing it. When's the last time you had to use your strength? I want that time from when I asked you the first time to the last time. I want that first time to be the last time you had to use your strength at work. When you're noticing that your employees, your team members, your folks are kind of having some struggles, it needs to be the last time they have struggles, or that shows you're not attuned to their issues. So we have a lot of moments here.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, we draw from similar practices, and we tell organizations all the time that it's not as simple as making a decision to do something. We're making a decision that we're committed to diversity, so we're going to do it. We're making a decision that we want to eliminate bias, so we're going to do it. It's not that simple. And we teach similar practice, and we draw a lot from restorative practice in our work. Yeah. And where we do the same thing, we have to level set to see each other's humanity, to ground ourselves in those things that make us feel good, just like you said, before we start talking about the hard stuff, right? But then we also try to distill down what we see in terms of understanding impact, like the harm that's caused in the environment, whether it's implicit or explicit, the need that perpetuates, and then we can start to design strategies that meet needs. And we do that because it helps us kind of move out of this space where we're litigating blame and we're litigating whose value systems are right and wrong. Because we just went through that. You and I just talked for 45 minutes talking about how difficult it is to divorce people from their value systems. So we're not even talking about your I don't know what your personal value systems are, right? Yeah. We're talking about the ways that we impact each other at work, within organizations, the ways we impact communities, right? So we have to actually ask communities how they're being impacted, understanding the needs that those create, and then we can start to design strategies, right? Then we can start to design strategies to see that. But if we're not having conversations with those who are impacting those who are on the margins, then we're completely missing the mark when it comes to equity work, period. So we have a couple minutes left. And I'm hoping that we can kind of land with, like, what is our biggest takeaway? What is our biggest lesson learned, you and I, as we do this work, that you think is critical for organizations that are trying to lean into how they can make informed decisions around grant making, how they can make informed decisions as an organization to really align these values with who they think they are, what they espouse?
I'm gonna do the most powerful moment I always do. And I did this just last week. 1,500 people were on the call. And I asked a very simple thing. Tell me 3 negative stereotypes you've heard about yourself. So I'm gonna just give you 5. I'm gonna steal a little bit of my little minute left to just give you 5 seconds to think about that. 3 things, negative stereotypes that you've heard about yourself. Mine, I'm a thug. I'm scary. I'm an athlete. As you think about those three things that you've heard about you, now I ask you, how many of those stigmas are truly deadly? How many of them rise to a point where when somebody sees you, they attach that stigma immediately? And quite frankly, if you die, you die. And there's going to be no consequences, no propagation. So what I'm saying is that what I want you to take away from this, if you can eliminate stigma, you eliminate the action and you eliminate the people looking away from the action. Because no one deserves to be mistreated. No one. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Give everybody a fair opportunity. Diversity without inclusion is simply decoration. Don't bring me in to paint the house. If you're ready to make some moves and do some real stuff, we can do some real stuff. But I'm
Hashtag no more diversity clubs. I love it. I'm right there with you. And I think my biggest takeaway, my biggest lesson learned is this work takes practice, and wanting to do good and having good intentions is not enough. It's only half the equation. You have to practice every day. Talk about race every day. You have to understand systemic issues every day. It's not as simple as saying, I want bias to go away, so it's going to go away. It's like flexing any muscle, like learning any new skill, getting better at any sport. In order to get good at free throws, you got to practice every day. So that same goes with this work, and lean on the expertise of folks who have methodology, who know what they're doing, who can help you strategize, who can help bring those things to light. Kevin, thank you so much for your time today. We're going to turn it back over to Lydia.
Well, Nnenna and Kevin, this was an exceptional evening. Thank you so much for such an impactful discussion and truly letting us be a fly on the wall to what it means to be a diversity strategist and practitioner around this work and the successes and barriers that you face. Thank you to our members and guests for joining us and for participating in Impact Philadelphia's journey toward a healthier and more equitable future for all of us. Your questions and comments that you would have submitted on the form will be answered. And before we go, I would like to remind Impact members of some important dates. For those members who are participating in the focus area committee process, the full proposals for your team are ready for you to start evaluating online and are active in slide room. It's hard to believe, but plans are underway for a second virtual spring education program in April. And please be sure to mark your calendars for Monday evening, June 7th, our virtual annual meeting at which we will celebrate our 5 Impact100 Philadelphia core mission grantees and our first ever community awards recipients. Details on these events and on everything happening at Impact are available on our website. Also, Impact is always open to your feedback, comments, suggestions about this program and anything else happening with Impact. You can contact the co-presidents, Carolyn Ashburn and Suzanne Wilcox, anytime at info@impact100philly.org. As we say goodbye, we will all be unmuted for a big round of applause for our speakers. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. 4-hour student night, 1,500 calories a day.
Thank you so much.
Bravo, bravo.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Truly.
Thank you.
Yes, great job. Thank you.